you've got questions, well, we have the man to answer those questions, Jeffrey Levine from Buckingham. Jeffrey, welcome back to another episode of Ask the Hammer.
Hey, Bob, good to be with you again.
Good to have you here. I've got a question from a reader, short one, goes like this. If I inherit my spouse's IRA, can I still use the stretch IRA?
Well, Bob, that's a great question. And here you may be able to stretch, but you may not even have to worry about that because as a spouse, you have special rules that apply to you that no other beneficiary has. For instance, one of those rules says if you set up an inherited IRA, as the surviving spouse, you don't have to take RMDs until the deceased spouse would have needed to start taking their RMDs. So let's say you're a young spouse, 50 years old, and you recently inherited an IRA from your 55-year-old spouse who unfortunately passed early. Well, you could set up an inherited IRA and your deceased spouse would have only been 55. They would not have to start taking RMDs for another 20 years. So you could actually avoid taking RMDs, even as a beneficiary, for another 20 years. The other part of this is that a spouse can also move an inherited IRA into their own IRA. No other beneficiary can do that. So whether it was that 50-year-old spouse in 20 years, who we were just talking about, or even an older spouse today who was 78 years old and just inherited from their 80-year-old spouse, they could take those inherited IRAs and instead of being a beneficiary and stretching, they could move it into their own IRA and take distributions as an owner of the account, which in some ways is similar to the stretch in that you have to take a little bit each year, but it's not the same as the stretch because it's calculated as if you were the original owner of the account. And so RMDs are actually less than they would be as a beneficiary.
Yeah. So generally, do you have a preference between using it as an inherited account versus rolling it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of nuance here, especially there's some new rules that apply in 2024 where, different situations call for slightly different approaches. But in general, for a spouse who is younger than 59 and a half when they inherit, if they're younger at that time, they typically want to leave it as an inherited IRA until at least age 59 and a half, because that gives them penalty-free access to the money. If they move it to their own IRA and they're younger than 59 and a half, and they later need the money before reaching 59 and a half, there would otherwise be a 10% penalty on that amount in addition to regular income tax. Now, for older spouses, older surviving spouses, when I say older, I mean older than 59 and a half, oftentimes a spousal rollover moving into your own account is the best option. But that said, there are always exceptions. For instance, a younger spouse who's older, let's say, an older spouse who is older than 59 and a half, if they're inheriting from someone who died who is younger, so let's say a 70-year-old inherits from a 60-year-old. Well, a 70-year-old is older than 59 and a half. Normally, you'd think just put it into their account. But by leaving it as an inherited IRA, that 70-year-old can actually delay RMDs until the 60-year-old spouse would have needed to take them. So there's all these nuances. Look, if something tragic like this occurs, and unfortunately it happens to all of us at some time, so maybe when something tragic like this occurs, there are major changes. There are major decisions that need to be made. And even if you don't normally work with a professional tax advisor or a professional financial advisor, this might be an opportune time to seek out at least some limited guidance during those periods of time when there's great transition and a lot of emotion, both of which tend to lead to poorer decisions and poorer outcomes.
Yeah. Well, I think our reader has been the beneficiary of some good guidance here, Jeffrey.
Well, I certainly hope so. And if you've got a question, you can give us a shout. Email us at askthehammer@buckinghamgroup.com. Again, that's askthehammer@buckinghamgroup.com. And we look forward to seeing your questions in our inbox real soon.